Hi everyone, Damsels in DIY here. Today we're going to show you how to make this gorgeous form-fitting corset.
These are going to be a part of our rose gown tutorial series, and this will be the bodice for the costumes. So it will fit really nicely with the hoop skirts and the petal skirts that we're going to be making later.
Yeah, we're so excited to show you this, and let's get started.
To make this flower costume corset, you will need a sewing machine, scissors, measuring tape, a ruler, fabric marking tool, pins, seam ripper, lighter, automatic abacus, 1/4 inch wide machine washable steel boning in the sizes that are needed. If you are making a plus size costume, you may need to consider 1/2 inch boning for extra strength. 1 to 2 yards of facing fabric in the color and style of your choice, 2 to 3 yards of interfacing fabric, 1 to 2 yards of lining fabric, thread, 15 plus feet of double-sided satin 1/2 inch wide ribbon in the color of your choice, and optional but recommended, some light colored fabric to pattern on before making your final corset pattern. Bed sheets work great and can be picked up at secondhand stores for very cheap. This corset design relies on 5 different pattern pieces. 2 pieces in the front that create the breast cupping, 2 different side pieces, and 1 piece for the back that holds the lacing in the finished corset. Before we get started making this corset, there are several measurements you will need to take using your soft measurement tape. We've linked our 41 costume measurement video in the description below. Go ahead and take those measurements before starting and you will have them all ready to go for the rest of the costume creation process. Let's get started making piece number 1. Start by taking your center breast to sternum measurement and making a line across your fabric like this. Now take your bust to waist measurement and draw it directly down from your first line. Next, take 3/7 of your bust to waist measurement and add this extra length to the bottom of the line you just made. Make sure to mark a line across horizontally between these lines so you know where they meet. This line will be your waistline and will be useful later for patterning. Now take 1/2 of your breast to sternum measurement and tilt it up and above the right side of your breast line like this. This will help create the breast cupping of your corset. Now curve a line up from your center bust point to the point you created. Take your dynamic bust to waist measurement and remove 1 inch from it. This will help flatten the breast a tad in the corset. Take your soft measuring tape and use that measurement to create a curved shape down to your waistline like this and make it meet about 2 inches from your center line. Don't be too scared of this step. As long as it looks as similar to this as it can with your measurement, you should be fine. Now extend this line down from that point until you are about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch away from the bottom of your parallel line on the other side, and then connect these lines together so that you have a finished shape like this. This should create a bit of a dip at the center of the front of your corset. Make sure if you haven't connected the 2 lines at the top that you do so now. With that, you have finished piece number 1. Now it's time to create piece number 2. Take your first piece, flip it over, and use the curved edge you made to draw piece number 2's first edge. Next, make sure that your bust line matches up with piece number 1 from the top by curving down from the curved edge to match the same point as piece 1. From there, draw a straight line down like you did on piece 1 while making sure there are still about 2 inches at the waistline. Then add a 1/2 inch to 1 inch below this line and use this new measurement to make the bust point slightly less steep. Make sure that the line is slightly longer on the curved side of piece 2 than on the straight edge like so. After that, you have piece 2 created. Now take use of the straight edge of piece 2 to create the first edge of piece 3. What we are doing at this point is just making sure that the shapes are close to what we want. After this, we will be measuring again to make the proper fit. Take piece 3 and shape it approximately like this. Curve the top edge of piece 3 down a little like this. It should be a gradual transition. Next, slant piece 3 out slightly as you go down to the waist measurement line. Then angle it out kind of dramatically at this point before curving it back to the front edge, like so. Make sure that you are copying all of your waist, bust, and lower edge lines over from piece to piece. This will help you keep track of where each measurement belongs when you do your second patterning pass. Next, let's make our basic piece 4. To make the first edge of piece 4, take your soft measuring tape and measure the angle of piece 3, like this. Take that measurement and make piece 4's first edge a straight line of that measurement. Now make a 4-inch straight upper edge for this line, then create a rectangle using those measurements like this. With that, you have finished piece 4. Now take that measurement again and use it to create the first edge of piece 5. This edge on piece 5 will have an angle out at the waist like piece 3, but a little less dramatic. The top edge will be flat and go about 5 inches. The back edge should be the same length as the other side, but completely flat. This edge should connect to the other side like this. Now you have all 5 basic pieces patterned. Make sure that you have your waist and bust lines going across all the pieces, and then you are ready for the next step of making sure that all of the pieces are properly fit to the body. Now let's get started with the second phase of patterning. Let's cover what we already know. We know that the front 2 pieces are nearly perfect. We measured them perfectly for the bust line, and no changes should be made there. We know the height of the pieces is perfectly established and do not need to change. We know that the upper lines we've drawn on our pieces represent the bust line, the center lines represent the waistline, and the lower edges are an upper midpoint between our waist and hips. So now it's time to get our calculators out because we've got a lot of adding up to do. Each pattern piece represents 2 pieces in your corset, so that means each piece needs to be doubled in calculations now. So let's start with the bust line. Take each piece and measure it across the bust line. Double that measurement and then add your 5 doubled measurements together. Make note of this bust measurement and write it down. Now do the same with the waistline and lower edge line. Write these all down so you remember them. Now take your actual bust measurements and write that down. Also take your tight waist measurement. Last, take your waist measurement and your hip measurement and find the difference between the two. Divide the difference by 2 and add this to your waist measurement. This will be your corset's lower edge measurement. Once you have these written down, you can start to figure out the measurement differences between your measurements and the pattern's measurements. The key will be to fix the difference across the pieces while focusing the majority, if not all of the changes on pieces 3, 4, and 5. Make sure that as you make reductions on the pieces, you try your best to keep the general shapes. Also double the changes, since again, there will be twice as many pattern pieces in the end. The best piece to remove or add to is piece 4. So if you have some extra inches in both your bust and waist, all you need to do is add or remove whole inches from the side. Remember again, during this process, every inch you remove or add is actually 2 inches. If your corset is completely oversized, you can cut away your inches from pieces you have already created. However, if it is undersized, you can put your pieces on your patterning fabric and draw the extra inches you need. When you need to remove inches only from the bust, use a ruler to draw a line from the waist edge to the amount of inches times 2 you want removed from the bust, then cut that sliver off. When you want inches only removed from the waist, mark in how much you want to remove and then sliver it out like this. Now take piece number 5 and place it on your patterning fabric again. Add an extra 1.5 inches to the back straight edge of your pattern. Then add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to all other sides. After that, cut this piece out. Next, place pieces 1 through 4 on your fabric. With these pieces, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to all sides and cut them out as well. Now give yourself a good pat on the back. You've finished patterning your corset. Take these 5 pieces and fold over your facing material, interfacing material, and lining material. Cut 2 of each piece from all 3 materials and keep these pieces stacked together. If you want to use your pattern pieces again in the future, we have a couple labeling tricks to make it easy to keep track of them. Put a letter or string of letters on each of the pieces to represent which project they are from. When making projects for clients, we use their initials. Mark each piece with their number so you know which piece is which. That way there's no guesswork in the future during assembly. Mark each piece with how much seam allowance it has, if any. We do this, by example, by marking 1/2 SA, and in special cases like piece 5, we would mark 1.5 seam allowance back edge. And last, if you have added your seam allowance to the pieces, label them RTC, meaning ready to cut. This will make reuse of the pieces way easier in the future. Now that you have all of your fabric cut, it's time to start assembly. Take both facing pieces one and lay them right sides together. Then take your interfacing fabrics and lay one on each side like this. Pin these pieces at the center seam. Now take piece 2 and pin the round-edged side to the round edges sides of piece 1 with the right sides together and the interfacing materials on the outsides again. Next, take piece 3 and pin the front edges to piece 2 like this. Take piece 4 and pin them to the angled edge of piece 3. And last, take piece 5 and pin the angled edges to piece 4. Now do the same with your lining pieces only. Make sure that the right sides are together on these pieces as well. Double check that all your pieces are pinned in their proper places. Better fixing a mistake now than later. Now take your lining and outer facing corset pieces and sew the seams of each piece down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance you made during the patterning. Once you have done this to both pieces, they should now look like this. Now check your lower edges. There may be some lower edges that didn't quite line up and may need to be trimmed. Carefully trim these edges while making sure to make identical trimming on the other side as well. Then do the same thing to your lining so that all the pieces are roughly the same size. Now take your facing corset side and lay it open in front of you, like this. Take your measuring tape and measure each seam to figure out how long you need your boning to be. Make sure you leave at least a 1/2 inch on each side of this measurement so that you have a seam allowance in the future. Now lay your lining out and place a piece of boning next to each seam to keep track of where the boning pieces go. Take your interfacing material that is left over and cut long 1.5 inch strips from it. You will need a lot of these, so cut out quite a few. Now take these strips and pair them up and sew them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides, like this. If you cut the strips too wide, be sure to trim them to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now cut these tubes so that they are 1 inch longer than each piece of boning. Take your boning slips and sew the top edge of the slips across at the 1/2 inch mark, then sew them down the center of your facing corset pieces seams. Make sure to keep the seams spread flat while doing this. Sew them as close to the seam lines as you can. This can be a little difficult at the bust. Once the slips are sewn in place, take your bones and slip them inside. Now sew down the lower edges of the casings to secure the bones inside. Take your front and lining pieces and pin them together along the seams with both right sides together and seams facing out. Once these pieces are in place, sew these pieces together as carefully as you can along the upper and lower edges. Leave both back edges open. Trim your seam allowance on the upper and lower edges to 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, to make sure that the corset is extra secure, zigzag stitch the upper and lower raw seams to secure them even more so. Once this is done, flip the corset inside out so that the right sides are now facing out. Now fold in your back edges of the corset by 1.5 inches and pin them. Now take your measuring tape and check that the waist and bust measurements are still correct. If they are too small or too big, you can adjust the seam allowance in the back to shift the difference a little. Once that is completed and you are sure of the fit, you can finish sewing your corset. Starting at the back corner, sew 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch seam down the back edge, very carefully along the bottom, up the other back edge, and carefully around the top. Next, sew a second seam along each back edge that is 3/4 of an inch from the edge straight down, like this. This will create the space for your buttonholes. Now you can finish your corset along the back edge with the buttonholes. We like to put 1 buttonhole in for every inch of back. This makes for a nice tight lacing, which fits beautifully. Once you have your buttonholes on one side, make sure you get the same number on the other side. After that, carefully use your scissors and seam ripper to open the buttons. Again, do this very carefully. Once that is done, cut your ribbons and burn the raw edges with your lighter to keep them from fraying. Your lower lace should only be going in a couple of holes up to your waist, while your upper lace will need to be long enough to go down and meet the lower lace in the same hole at the waist. We recommend making your laces longer than you think they need to be and then trimming them down to size later. Once you have your corset laced up, it is ready for wearing. We will be doing a final video at the end of the Rose Dress series to show you how we decorated our outfits, including our corsets. So keep an eye out for that in the future.
We hope you guys enjoyed watching this tutorial and stay tuned for when we show you how to make the rest of the rose gown.
The next video is going to be showing you how to make fairy wings that are strapless and fit right into the corset.
I am so excited for this. Thank you again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye! I want to poke the point. Can I?
Yeah.
Now we've got our ending.
No!